The second-hand market can easily be overlooked when it comes to looking for your new bike. However, it's full of perfectly good used bikes that are ripe for the picking. But it can be a bit of a minefield, so it's important to make sure that you know what you're looking for before taking the plunge. Hi, I'm Liam from Off-road.cc, and today we're going to go through my top 10 tips to make sure that you're fully prepared before buying your new second-hand mountain bike. Buying second-hand comes with a number of advantages, with the main one being that they're usually far cheaper than what they would be if you buy brand new. That makes them more easily accessible if you're just starting off in the sport, and if you fall off, you don't have to worry so much about the bike because you haven't put as much money into it. However, there are a few shortfalls. Second-hand bikes will come in differing conditions, and unfortunately some sellers may try to pull the wool over your eyes or even sell you a stolen bike. So it's incredibly important to know what to look for. On a separate note, these tips should also be useful for anybody who's trying to sell their old bike. Kind of use them in reverse to find out what a buyer would be looking for when looking at your bike. And if anything needs fixing, get it fixed as soon as you can. After all, a good looking and a good running bike will always fetch a higher price. So without further ado, let's get on with these tips, and the first one is to know what you're looking for. This one is important to both newbies and veterans alike, but it's important to put some research in to find out what kind of style of riding you would like to do and what kind of bike suits that style. In itself, it is a pretty big task, but it'll pay back in dividends, because if you bought the wrong bike for the wrong style of riding, you'll be straight back to Pink Bike or eBay looking for another. This is where Google and YouTube's an absolute fountain of knowledge. But if you're unsure where to start, have a look at the different categories of bikes and the styles of riding that they cater towards. This will help you find out what kind of style of riding you want to do and the kind of bike that will best suit that best. But please don't go buying any old bike because it's cheap. It might not suit the style of riding that you want, and you will regret that purchase. Now you've got a good idea of the style of bike that you want, this is the perfect time to think up a budget. Of course, as we all know, the more money that you can throw at the bike, the better the bike will be, but there is always a bargain to be found in the depth of eBay or Pink Bike. So this is where your bike hunt really gets going. All it takes is a quick search on your favourite second-hand sales site to find out what you can expect to pay for a certain bike. While you're there, take note of how the prices fluctuate from bike to bike and brand to brand. Not only will this help you decide on a budget, but also give you a good knowledge of how much a certain bike is worth and whether or not you can haggle based on its general market price. While you're deciding on your budget, it's also a really good idea to over budget a little bit. That's just in case that the bike that you're looking at needs a bit of servicing after you've bought it. So now you found the bike that you're interested in and you're ramping up to a range reviewing, but hang on, slow down a second. It's a really good idea to take notes of the spec that the bike is advertised with. This is just in case that the seller changes the spec when you come to the viewing. That way you can reflect it when you haggle for the price. While you're writing those notes down, it's also worth thinking of any questions you might like to ask the seller. If you're unsure, it's great to know when the bike was purchased, when the components were last serviced, and if there's any proof of purchase. Feel free to ask these questions before or after, but if you ask them before, that'll paint a more thorough picture of what to expect from the bike before viewing it and whether or not it's actually worth viewing. If it's too good to be true, then it probably is. This is an unfortunate point that's prevalent in the world of all kinds of sales, and one that's ever true in the world of cycling. If you find a high-end bike at a silly price, it's more than likely that there's something wrong with it, or it might have even been stolen. As with many things, you get what you pay for, and sometimes you can even get scammed. So it's safest to ignore those mind-blowing deals unless you can find solid proof that it's a legitimate sale, or you don't mind a bit of a fixer-upper. So you found the bike that you like, you've asked all of the questions, and the stars are aligning. Now it's time to arrange your viewing. I recommend that you arrange your viewing in a public place and bring a friend with you. That public place could be a supermarket or outside your local bike shop. Just make sure it's somewhere with CCTV or it's in a populated area, and that's just to deter either party from doing anything untoward. On a separate note, if your seller asks for cash in collection, make sure you hide that cash the best you can. If you go around waving it around, that might attract other people who might want to take your money off of you without leaving you with a bike. But remember that there's services such as PayPal and Monzo that offer instant and safe bank transfers. That way you won't have to carry any money around at all. Now you've got the bike in front of you, this is where you have a really thorough look around. Scratches, dings and paint chips aren't usually anything to worry about, but if you find a crack, stay away from that bike like the plague. No matter how long the seller claims to have ridden it for, it could fail underneath you and you could end up in hospital, so it's safest just to stay away. This is an ideal time to make sure that all the bikes and the components are working properly. If you can, hop on the bike, shift through all the gears to make sure they're shifting correctly. If the bike has suspension, give that a bit of a squish. When cycling suspension, you're listening for any weird sounds that may indicate that the suspension might need a service. While you're there, also go through all of the suspension settings to make sure they work properly. If there isn't any change to the way the suspension feels, that also says that it needs a service. Then have a pull on the brakes and they should be nice and sharp. If they feel spongy, that means there's air in the system and they'll need a bleed. While you're there, have a quick look at the brake pads just to see how much life is left on them. If they're quite bare, I wouldn't worry too much because brake pads are usually quite cheap to pick up. Wiggle the wheels laterally, shake around the pivot points while feeling around the bearing, and hold the front brake while rocking the bike and holding the headset to make sure if there's any play. Any play in any of these areas usually means that the bearing is on its last legs. And if it's something like the headset, it's not such a big deal because it's not an expensive fix. But if it's a pivot point, a full suspension bike, you'll be looking at replacing all of the bearings on that suspension system, and that's not a cheap fix. The last things you'll need to check are the wheels and the tyres, so check around the circumference of the tyre and check for any repaired punctures, any damage and wear, and around the rim for any dings or cracks. So a wrecked tyre isn't the end of the world, because if you've been riding already, you may be looking to replace that tyre anyway. But if the rim is cracked, that's the end of that, and you'll be needing to buy another one. Though both of these can be referred to when haggling on the price. With everything looking good, it doesn't take 5 minutes to throw the bike serial number into a service like Bike Register. Bike Register is a completely free service that checks both its own and the police's stolen bike databases. If it pops up here, that means it's definitely stolen. Unknowingly buying a stolen bike not only adds to the big bike theft issue, but you could also receive a knock on the door from the police who will very quickly relieve you of that bike, and you probably won't get your money back. If you're unsure of where to check for a serial number, it's usually found around the bottom bracket of any bike. Now it's time for the thrill of the sale, and even this is best done with a little bit of preparation. But before we get any further, be sure to respect the seller, as they essentially hold all of the cars and they can call the sale off just like that. Even before you turn up to your arranged location with your henchman mate, have a lowest and a highest figure in mind, along with a plan of attack. As you check over the bike and you find issues, make adjustments to those prices, and of course if the bike isn't as in good condition as you were led to believe, lower your offer. But remember, there's no rule saying that you have to haggle. If you're happy with the bike and you're happy with the price, nice one, you've got a new bike. But also remember that you don't have to buy the bike just because you're there in front of you. You shouldn't feel any pressure to buy the bike just because you're there. Taking your new second-hand bike to a bike shop, although if you're already mechanically savvy, is a great thing to do to make sure that your new bike is as ready to hit the trails as you are. It will cost you a little bit more, but that is what you've over budgeted for. Riding a new bike is a thrill that every cyclist enjoys. But for the first few rides, take it easy because every bike is very different and it will take you a little bit of time for you to get used to before you feel at one. But above everything else, enjoy your new bike. So those are my top 10 tips to follow before buying a second-hand bike, and hopefully they'll help you out a little bit when it comes to buying your next one. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content just like this, plus a plethora of mountain bike and gravel bike reviews. And if you'd like to see a written version of this video, head on over to www.off.road.cc. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.